sewing machine.
There were these products that really improved the lives of consumers, like the sewing machine. The problem was these products were very expensive.
Most people couldn't afford to pay for a sewing machine all at once. So if you were a sewing machine company, you'd offer your customers a payment plan, which meant you needed a contract.
But negotiating all those contracts for all those customers, that was going to be a huge headache. So the sewing machine companies decided we're just going to make things simple. In order to sell these standardized, mass-produced sewing machines, we're going to give our customers standardized, mass-produced contracts.
It just makes the transactions go much quicker, much more smoothly, and it's easier for the salesperson because they can say, oh, I can't negotiate, sorry, this is our standard form. And we've all heard that, right? That's still something companies say to consumers.
And of course, these mass-produced contracts weren't just for sewing machines. Companies started to use them to sell pianos, washing machines, cars. They even became the norm in a lot of other industries.
And as these contracts became popular, they kind of caused a scandal because big companies were using them to impose their terms on customers. People weren't even sure these contracts were valid because they were missing something fundamental.
There's no negotiating, there's no bargaining, and it was just this outrage. How dare you call this a contract? This idea that you could call anything a contract when it was just unilaterally imposed.
But these standardized contracts help make the transactions quick and easy. This whole new mass-produced economy was hanging in the balance. So there was a lot of pressure for courts to say these kinds of contracts were valid.
Judges started to squint and say, this looks close enough. There's still a piece of paper, people still have to sign it, so they're still agreeing to these contracts.
Sure, they're not negotiating terms, but they have an opportunity to read them. So if they sign it, it means that they're okay with the terms.
It was a compromise, but a compromise that more or less seemed to work. So courts adopted this newer, looser definition of a contract.
Contract law shifted a little bit in the sense that it became not just about promoting the free will of the parties. Now we also are considering things like transaction costs. Because we think, well, we don't want to slow down these transactions.
This was the key breakthrough in the second revolution in contracts. Courts decided that in the name of efficiency, in the name of lowering transaction costs, as long as you accepted the contract, signed on the dotted line, it didn't really matter how you arrived at the deal.
That was the law of contracts for several decades. There are some caveats and exceptions, but for a long time, this was basically how contracts worked. And when Nancy's teaching contract law to her students, she tells them, up until this point, the law mostly makes sense.
And then you move along, and then you stop, you put the brakes on, and you say, okay, well, now we're going to talk about internet contracts.
After the break, the third and final revolution in contracts. How the internet broke contracts. Or maybe how contracts broke the internet.
And the one case that opened the door to the stream of contracts we see today.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Front Door. Home to-do lists can seem endless. Repair the leaky dishwasher, fix the fridge, get the faucet to stop dripping. If only there was a way to get it all done. Now there is. Introducing Front Door, the one-stop home repair and maintenance app that lets you chat with home repair experts, diagnose the problem faster, and cross off that to-do list. When something in your home needs fixing or maintenance, open the Front Door. Download and get a free video chat.
Hey everyone, I'm Ramtin Arab.
I'm Randan Nifat.
We're the hosts of NPR's history podcast, Through Line.
And we're launching a new series called Past is Prologue, where we ask big picture thinkers about why things are the way they are. Everything from income taxes to affirmative action.
Listen to the Through Line podcast from NPR.
Our final revolution, the rise of internet contracts, began in the 90s. There was this huge court case that totally changed what it means to enter into a contract.
It all started with a broke grad student and his get-rich-quick scheme.
The scheme in itself
hilarious.
That is Matt Zeidenberg. These days, he's a computer science professor at NYU, but he's also kind of a celebrity in the legal world. Because about 25 years ago, he got tangled up in one of the most controversial cases in the history of contracts.
I was the defendant in a lawsuit, ProCD versus Zeidenberg.
A landmark lawsuit.
Yeah, I guess.
This is not exactly a fond memory for Matt. To set the scene, it's the 90s, and Matt's at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's getting a PhD in computer science, and the internet is becoming a thing. This is before Google, before Facebook, and like a lot of computer science students at the time, Matt sees this as a gold rush.
Well, like I had no money, and like I gotta come up with some way to make a buck on the internet. That was what the whole idea behind this whole thing.
So this was Matt's idea. There's this company that had been digitizing phone books and putting them on CDs.
We're just going to use the term CD. We know that technically they're CD-ROMs. We know there's a difference. Nerds, please don't email us.
And Matt looks at these CDs and he's like, this information isn't proprietary. This company is just copying the phone book and putting it on CDs. So Matt decides he is going to copy the names and numbers off the CDs and put everything on a website and sell some banner ads.
So Matt buys the CDs, and inside the box with the CDs is this new type of contract. It was called a shrink wrap contract, because software used to be sold in shrink wrap boxes.
It's kind of funny they have to explain these things to people. You have to go to a store and buy the software, right? And it was in a box, and it was shrink wrap plastic around the box, and you rip the plastic off, and then you open the box. That was how they could tell whether or not it had been sold or not.
Matt buys the CDs, opens the box, and out falls a contract. A contract that says, by purchasing and keeping these CDs, you're agreeing not to copy the software.
These new so-called shrink wrap contracts, they were becoming pretty common in the software industry. Because in the beginning, software companies were worried that there was nothing stopping their customers from kind of doing exactly what Matt was planning to do. Copy their CDs and rip them off.
Software companies tried to protect themselves with a contract. But they didn't want to make every customer go through the hassle of signing a contract just to buy their software. So, they stuff a contract in the box, which Matt chooses to ignore. Did you have any sense that you might get in trouble for this? Or like,
Oh, definitely.
in Matt's defense, these shrink wrap contracts were in this legal gray area. No court had ever enforced them, and most lawyers didn't think they were valid. That's because he never signed on any dotted line. He couldn't even read the contract until he opened the box.
So Matt goes ahead with his plan, and his website ends up taking off. That's when the software company fights back. They send him a cease and desist letter, and Matt's like, whatever, I never agreed to your contract. So he neither ceases nor desists. So the company files a lawsuit. They're like, no, Matt, that actually was a real contract.
So they sued me for a lot of money, and that was intimidating, and then the fancy lawyers that they brought in, and the deposition was intimidating, and I didn't really have my lawyer was my boss's husband, who literally just been admitted to the bar like a week ago.
Did you ever feel like you were in over your head?
Yeah, I mean, I was very stressed out. I was a bit depressed, and I was very anxious, and I just thought that I was going to be crushed like a bug.
Eventually, Matt's case ends up in federal circuit court, and one of the judges, Frank Easterbrook, he writes this landmark opinion. We reached out to Judge Easterbrook, but he told us judges must let their opinions speak for themselves.
He actually said that.
So we asked our resident contracts nerd, Nancy Kim, to explain the Matt Zeidenberg decision for us.
What Zeidenberg represents is a big break in contract doctrine, in the sense that
It broke contracts.
it sort of did, or it disrupted it, I should say.
Judge Easterbrook decided that shrink wrap contracts are valid, that in the eyes of the law, Matt did accept the contract.
So it was this idea that, okay, well, even though you didn't agree to the contract before you bought the software, when it fell out of the box, you had notice that there were terms, because there it is. It's a piece of paper that fell out of the box. Now, if you had read them and you didn't like the terms, you could have brought the software back. That was the theory. Okay, so it opened the door to the idea that, hey, there are other ways that we can enter into a contract.
This was a radical new theory. Not only was there no bargaining or negotiating, but now you could agree to a contract without actively doing anything, just because a contract fell out of a box.
And Nancy says Judge Easterbrook, he's known as this practical-minded judge. And it seems like he's worried that without these easy shrink-wrap contracts, this new software age might struggle to take off. Like, in his decision, he wrote that if you made people sign contracts before they bought your software, it would, quote, return transactions to the horse and buggy age. So, Judge Easterbrook decides, in this case, to stretch the law a little bit. He loosens the definition of what it means to accept a contract.
And Easterbrook's compromise sets off the third revolution in contracts. In the first revolution of contracts, the question was, did customers negotiate and bargain freely? In the second revolution of contracts, the question was, well, did customers at least accept the terms and sign on the line? In this third revolution, the question has become, did customers get a chance to notice the contract?
Instead of looking at whether there was an offer that was accepted and the timing of when the contract was formed, now in this post-Zeidenberg world, we use a different standard, a standard of notice. Was the notice reasonable? And did the offeree, did the user manifest consent?
The Zeidenberg decision seemed reasonable at first, but over the last couple decades, it's opened the floodgates to all these new ways of getting customers to accept contracts, where companies can rope you into a contract just by, like, waving it in your direction, saying, well, you manifested consent because you didn't run away. This world, the post-Zeidenberg world, is the world that we're living in today.
Shrink-wrap contracts have spawned all these new different types of contracts. And if you've been on the internet, you've probably consented to a bunch of these. There's click wrap, when you accept a contract just by checking a box. There's sign-in wrap, where you automatically agree to a contract when you sign up for a website.
There's scroll wrap, which I think is the worst because it just makes you scroll.
No, Jeff, browse wrap is definitely the worst. It's very sneaky and basically everywhere.
A browse wrap is a hyperlink that's usually at the bottom of a website that says something like legal or terms of service or just simply terms. And you have to click on it in order to read it.
Browse wrap contracts are still in this legal gray area, but they help illustrate this game that companies are playing today.
Companies are trying to make contracts noticeable enough that courts will say the contract is valid, but they don't want to make the contract too annoying, too obvious.
Because of course they want to get you through the process as quickly as possible, right? It's not a good user experience. It's not supposed to be a good user experience if you're signing a legally binding contract. Those have always been uncomfortable. You know, you're not supposed to take those things lightly. So they try to make them as unobtrusive as possible. And that's where we run into issues.
The focus of courts these days is on how noticeable the contract is.
Yeah, so like there was this one case where the court said, well, this contract is not valid because the link to the contract wasn't underlined. So people might not know that there's a contract hiding behind there.
In another case, the court said the contract was valid because the notice was in all caps.
And then there's Greg Selden's case, the guy from the top of the show who tried to sue Airbnb. The courts decided that Greg had entered into a valid contract, that he did give up his right to sue, that Greg should have noticed the link to the contract because it was a red link on a white background.
And this is where we are now with contracts, arguing over font size and link color. And it's kind of wild, because each of these three revolutions in contracts, these compromises, they made sense at the time. They made transactions go more smoothly, protected budding industries, prioritized economic growth. But each of these revolutions also eroded what it meant to accept a contract. And they brought us to this place where it's so easy to enter into a contract that a lot of time it's happening by accident.
Nancy says contracts in this age, they are a far cry from how contracts started out.
So what a contract has become is the exact opposite of what it used to be. Before, a contract was a sort of a sign of empowerment, of control over your things that belong to you, what you could do. Now a contract is really a joke, right? It's a sign of giving up. Okay, I really want something, so I'm just gonna agree to it. I have no choice. It's really a sign not of empowerment, but of helplessness, right? It's learned helplessness.
Acquiescence.
Of acquiescence, exactly.
We've ended up in this kind of dystopian world where we've traded a piece of our free will just for the convenience of making an online dinner reservation or buying a shirt from a website or really just doing anything on the internet. And there's so many contracts that we've all become numb. Nobody even really reads them anymore. We just click and accept, click and accept, click and accept. You can email us, planetmoney@npr.org, or find us on TikTok, Facebook, or Instagram, or @planetmoney.
Our show today was produced by James Sneed, was edited by Just Jang, and fact-checked by Sierra Juarez. It was engineered by James Willits. Alex Goldmark is our executive producer. A special thanks to Kerry Welch for talking to us about his experience with these online contracts. I'm Jeff Woe.
And I'm Emma Peasley. This is NPR. Thanks for listening.
This message comes from NPR sponsor, the Capital One Venture X card. When you book through Capital One Travel using the Venture X card, you earn 10x miles on hotels and rental cars and 5x miles on flights. And you earn unlimited 2x miles on all other purchases, plus receive up to $300 back as a statement credit. The Venture X card from Capital One. What's in your wallet? Terms apply. See CapitalOne.com for details.
I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. That I might have been given a bad break, but I've got an awful lot to live for. Thank you.
It's been 84 years since Yankee legend Lou Gehrig delivered his famous farewell speech to a sold-out Yankee stadium after having been diagnosed with a disease that would become synonymous with his name, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS. The disease attacks nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord. It takes away a person's ability to talk, walk, and ultimately breathe. There is still no cure for ALS, and treatments for the disease have been slow to develop, though an experimental drug recently approved by the FDA may slow down the disease and extend patients' lives. In 2021, President Biden signed legislation known as Act for ALS.
This bill really matters. You know, you all know, ALS robs patients and families of so much. The immense physical, emotional, and financial toll.
Act for ALS expands federal funding for ALS treatment and gives patients quicker access to treatments still under FDA review. When he signed the bill into law, Biden called the legislation the result of Democrats and Republicans reaching across the aisle and the advocacy of patients.
Cases like Brian Wallace and his wife Sandra.
In the aftermath of my diagnosis, Sandra and I cried, and we held our family tight. We did so because being diagnosed with ALS today is a death sentence. There is no cure. I will not see my daughters grow up.
That was 6 years ago. Consider this. About 5,000 people in the U.S. are diagnosed with ALS every year. Most die within 2 to 5 years. But for Brian Wallach and his wife Sandra Abravaya, his ALS diagnosis marked the start of a mission to make ALS chronic, not fatal. From NPR, I'm Juana Summers. It's Thursday, July 13th.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Indeed. Hire great talent for your business faster with Indeed. Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed. Claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/consider this. Terms and conditions apply. This message comes from NPR sponsor Noom. Noom uses science and personalization so you can manage your weight for the long term. The best part? You decide how Noom fits into your life, not the other way around. Sign up for your trial today at Noom.com.
Support for this podcast comes from NPR sponsor Raymond James, a firm focused on transforming lives, businesses, and communities through tailored wealth management, banking, and capital markets solutions. Disclosures at raymondjames.com. This episode is brought to you by Carvana. Carvana is in the business of driving you happy. With the widest selection of used cars under $20,000, you're bound to find a car that'll put a smile on your face. Visit Carvana.com or download the app. Availability may vary by market.
It's Consider This from NPR. A few weeks ago, on a bright spring day, I headed up to Capitol Hill to meet with a man named Brian Wallach. He's 42 years old with clear blue eyes and salt and pepper gray hair, and in another reality, Wallach could have run for office. He was political director for Barack Obama's 2008 New Hampshire campaign. He served in the White House counsel's office during Obama's administration and later was an assistant U.S. attorney in Chicago. But for the past 6 years, Wallach has been working on a different kind of campaign.
Hello, Senator. How are you?
He's been asking lawmakers like Illinois Senator Dick Durbin to increase funding and access to drugs for people suffering from ALS. 1 in 300 people will receive an ALS diagnosis in their lifetime. In 2017, Wallach was one of them. In No Ordinary Campaign, a documentary about his fight against ALS, Wallach recalled the moment a neurologist told him he thought he had the disease.
And I said, okay, I don't know much about it, but what does that mean? And he said, well, it's not good. There's no treatment. There's no cure. I said, okay, how long do you think I've left? And he said, on average, people live 6 months after they're diagnosed.
That conversation with his doctor was 6 years ago. It was also the day Wallach and his wife Sandra Agravaya brought their second daughter home from the hospital. Since then, the couple hasn't stopped fighting. They established I Am ALS, a foundation dedicated to helping other patients navigate the disease.
Empower yourself. Talk to your doctor, talk to your spouse, talk to your caregiver. Make this a part of your fight in a way that enables you to be here for years to come rather than reacting in the moment.
And Wallach testified 3 times before Congress. By the time he testified in 2021, ALS had significantly weakened his voice. His wife Sandra helped him deliver his testimony.
Sandra Agravaya. This is our closing argument for our lives. We want to live. You have the power to make that possible.
That testimony helped lead to the passage of a law called Act for ALS that funds $100 million worth of ALS initiatives each year. The day I met up with Brian and his executive assistant Winona Koldyke at the U.S. Capitol, he was there to lobby members of Congress for more money and to make sure that the funding he had worked so hard to help secure didn't get cut in the debt ceiling fight, which was raging at the time.
Oh, we're never early. We are this time.
Wallach, who now moves around in a motorized wheelchair, met with members of both parties over 2 days, including Representative Mike Quigley, a Democrat from Illinois.
Mike, it's amazing as always to see you.
That day on Capitol Hill, Wallach was tireless. He navigated large parts of the U.S. Capitol complex, which isn't very friendly.
to co-sponsor the bill.
Well, there's Chicago tactics that seem to work.
A few weeks later, I visited Brian and his wife Sandra Abravaya at their home in suburban Chicago.
Welcome, guys. I'm going to give everyone hugs. Yeah, why not? Hey, nice to see you.
I asked the couple why they think they've been successful.
You know, this community is remarkable, and Brian and I come from a background of community organizing. To find a community of organizers who would spend as much time working at this as the ALS community has, would do their homework so diligently, their research, get educated, dedicate their time. I mean, it's really an outlier in the world of organizing for a group of people to throw themselves at a problem in this way, and it essentially happens because you have a group of people whose lives really are on the line when you have a disease that's on the cusp of being solved.
It's so apparent the way that the skills the two of you have, the relationships that you've built over your careers are woven all through the work of I Am ALS. How has that helped you succeed? I mean, you have access to a network that many patients don't have.
That's in large part why we decided we had to do I Am ALS. I was very reticent at first to start a nonprofit. I had been the founding executive director of 2 nonprofits. I knew what a big undertaking that would be. And after Brian spent a lot of time meeting with people and just kind of getting to know the sector, he said to me, I don't really think we have a choice.
We were sitting at the kitchen table as their 5- and 7-year-old daughters headed out to the pool. Their house had to be remodeled to accommodate Brian's wheelchair.
So this is both Brian's bedroom and his office.
On one wall, there's a collage featuring pictures of Brian and Sandra's ALS advocacy and a note from their former boss, Barack Obama. To Brian and Sandra, so proud of you. Obama first ran for president as a community organizer, and Sandra and Brian credit members of the ALS community advocating for themselves as a reason for their success.
When you go to someone and you ask them for help in saving your life, it is a moment where politics fade away and it becomes about the humanity of the people who are sitting right in front of you.
Members of the ALS community came together that same night at Wrigley Field when the Chicago Cubs marked Lou Gehrig Day. Lou Gehrig was a New York Yankee first baseman who retired from baseball in 1939 after he was diagnosed with ALS. That night, people living with the disease and their families were there to cheer on the Cubs. At the gates of the stadium, ballpark staff handed out bright blue t-shirts with the Cubs logo and the words "End ALS for Lou." Brian and Sandra took in some of the game from the bleachers with friends and family before heading into a private suite with others affected by ALS. They checked on how people were doing, talked about promising treatments, they laughed. This kind of day would have been exhausting for anyone, let alone Brian, whose body is deteriorating. There are a lot of people out there who would not do what the two of you have done with a diagnosis like ALS. They would have chosen to stay home or go to the beach and spend time with family and friends, and instead you have traveled and testified on Capitol Hill. You built a patient-driven movement. What makes the two of you do this? How do you stay so driven?
You don't want me to say it's caffeine? Okay.
Relatable.
We are authentically hopeful, but we do think that if we step away or if we stop driving as hard as we're driving, that there might be less of a chance to succeed. And if we let it fizzle out and if we let that spark die, we might just lose all of that. And I would add to that I wake up every day and I realize that I want to live and see many more days. And I want that for every family fighting this disease.
Brian and Sandra's advocacy is inseparable from their desire to survive. And before we ended, I asked them a more personal question. What do the two of you think about when you think about the future?
I think about being 70 and sitting on the front porch with Sandra, sipping lemonade, and just enjoying our time together. And I know that our daughters will come by often and make a lot of noise. I stay really focused on that vision. I do too. It's so simple. We don't want anything in life except for to live. That's it. Sipping lemonade on the front porch at 70. And that's the dream.
That was Brian Wallach and his wife, Sandra Abravayo. It's Consider This from NPR. I'm Juana Summers.
Want to learn how to be a master of business without going back to school? This summer enroll in the Planet Money Podcast MBA. Enjoy classic Planet Money stories about the fundamentals of business, and then we'll break down the concepts, whether you want to start your own side hustle or just survive in your job. A little business know-how will make you richer, at least in knowledge. Every Wednesday till Labor Day on Planet Money from NPR.
Vermont's Governor Phil Scott addressed reporters and Vermonters earlier today and told them that after days of flooding, it's not over yet.
Unfortunately, parts of the state are now expecting severe thunderstorms, which could bring more flash flooding, hail, and even the threat of a tornado.
As many as 9 inches of rain fell in parts of Vermont this week. To the question of whether it's possible to be prepared for something like this, consider Christiana Athena Blackwell. She moved to a new house in Plainfield, Vermont with her husband and baby 5 days ago and left her unpacked boxes in the basement, as you do, which then flooded.
We have to face that reality, get prepared for the future, but I have my family, I have what matters, and a really nice community. I'm worried about Vermont and sad.
Coming up on Today Explained, preparing for disasters in an age when they just keep coming. Support for Today Explained comes from Washington Wise. It's an original podcast from Charles Schwab. Decisions made in Washington, D.C. can affect the markets every day, but what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab. The show covers the stories making news in Washington and also how they might affect your finances and investments. You can listen today at schwab.com/WashingtonWise. That's schwab.com/WashingtonWise.
It's some of the most expensive meat in the world, but is it even meat? This summer, for the first time, Americans are going to be able to try actual chicken meat that didn't involve killing a chicken.
This episode of Gastropod, we are among the very first people to taste our way through these brand new lab-grown offerings. Chicken, hamburger, bacon, salmon, bluefin tuna, we tasted it all.
We wanted to know whether it matches up to the real thing, but we also wanted to know if it can ever really replace meat from animals, not to mention keep our planet from going up in smoke.
Find Gastropod Pod wherever you get your podcasts and taste the future.
It's Today Explained. I'm Noelle King. Nina Keck is a senior reporter with Vermont Public, and she has had an unusually busy week.
Normally, I cover older Vermonters and issues around aging, but with the flooding that's gone on, it's all hands on deck, and we are all focused on the damage and the recovery right now.
What is the mood like in Vermont today? How are people feeling?
I spent most of yesterday afternoon in Ludlow, which was one of the hardest hit towns in the state. And, you know, on the one hand, it was truly devastated by the flooding. Businesses were grappling with the after effects, the cleanup.
There's furniture all over the streets and people's lawns, broken glass. It's chaos. Just look around and try to figure out where all these things came from.
There was a palpable feeling of frustration and sadness, but I have to say there was this mixture of energy too and community spirit that really was kind of awe-inspiring to see, because there was this muck everywhere. People were in filthy mud boots and shorts. They were tired. Some were wearing masks because now the mud is kind of dried and it's created this brownish dust that's everywhere. But they were all cleaning together and they were sharing stories and talking about, well, how did you do and how did you do and what can I do to help? And that was kind of heartening to see. So I think I've seen a lot of destruction. I've seen a lot of blown out roads and crumbling pavement and houses that are going to need a lot of work and buildings and businesses that are closed. But I think there were no fatalities so far that have been reported, which is really kind of a miracle.
I read that in the hardest hit parts, up to 9 inches of rain fell, and it was very fast. In the areas that were hardest hit, what kind of destruction are we talking about here? What should we envision?
So my colleague up in Montpelier said you cannot understate the devastation that occurred in our state capital. Everything was underwater.
We are looking down Main Street towards State Street, and you can see what a lake it is.
He said he saw people being rescued. They had swift boat rescue teams that were operating all over the state. But he said he also saw just random citizens in kayaks and canoes and on paddle boards. In Ludlow, where I was yesterday, when the waters were raging, cars and trucks were floating down the street and being submerged under bridges. The damage has been catastrophic. We're all still sort of wrapping our heads around the damage that occurred. Thousands of homes and businesses have been really damaged, and it's going to take months, years to clean up and do the repair work necessary.
I spoke to a woman earlier this week who had just moved to Plainfield, Vermont. 3 days in Plainfield and her house flooded.
I can see the river from our house, but it was looking okay until about between 3 and 5. It's rapidly raising, and we were getting, okay, nervous. Let's make a plan. Should we have a place to go just in case?
When was the last time Vermont experienced something like this?
The last thing that comes to mind is Tropical Storm Irene, which was 2011. That was a hurricane when it hit the east coast of the United States, but by the time it got to Vermont, it had dropped down to a tropical storm. Nonetheless, it dropped, I want to say, 11 inches at least in some parts of the state. Not at least, but about 11 inches over a very short amount of time, and it just hammered the state. This recent rain that we got was similar because there was a lot of it, but it was over several days after we had already had saturated ground. So people are drawing a lot of similarities, but also differences. Some areas of the state were much harder hit recently, where wider swaths of the state were hurt in Irene.
This supposed 100-year scenario has now happened twice in a span of 11, 12 years. And so there's definitely some bewilderment. People are still trying to wrap their heads around it.
The woman in Plainfield we spoke to, Christiana, she told told me that an emergency worker showed up at her home before the worst of the flooding started and told her to get out.
We got a knock on the door from emergency team just saying we're evacuating this street. Waste no time. Don't go left. Take a right. Go to the Opera House.
That seems like good disaster preparedness. After Hurricane Irene, was there a sense that this could happen again?
Absolutely. Vermont Governor Phil Scott declared a state of emergency ahead of this storm on Sunday. And I think he had a lot of emergency preparations in the works. I believe there were swift boat rescue teams that had been requested. Several came from North Carolina. He had reached out to other states. Massachusetts sent up crews, and they were available to provide aid. And I think just communities, Vermont, I think you have to realize is, for people that don't live here, it's a very rural state. It's a lot of small towns and villages and communities. It's hyper local. And after going through Irene, a lot of towns developed much better emergency plans. My own town has an emergency plan director and really mobilized ways to reach out to neighbors on a hyper local level. And I think, you saw that in communities this time around. They kind of knew the drill that, this can happen, and this is who we should talk to in our town. This is maybe where the best place is to have emergency meetings or provide shelter later. So I definitely think the state was better prepared, but you really never can fully prepare for something like this because you don't know how bad it's going to be and where it's going to happen.
Are people in Vermont talking about climate change, or is this viewed as, just an isolated natural disaster?
No, I think people are talking about climate change. My colleagues at Vermont Public have been reporting on that a lot, talking to climatologists that have been looking at, well, what's the pattern with these storms, and when we get heavy rains, why do they linger, and is that going to be the new pattern? I think people are very concerned about it, and it, like everybody probably in the country and in the world, just sort of trying to wrap their heads around, well, what can we do as individuals or as towns to make a difference. But I think people are looking at it because here in Vermont, we've got 4 seasons that are all being impacted. We're seeing winters for the ski season, which is so important here. Snowmaking operations have had to shift to different warmer temperatures. We're seeing the maple sugar industry kind of worry about, well, if it warms up earlier than we're used to, that starts the sap running. And then you've got farmers dealing with warmer temperatures, maybe drier conditions sometimes, or wetter conditions in the summer. So yeah, it's something that I think we're dealing with a lot here in Vermont.
Nina Keck, she's a senior reporter with Vermont Public. You Should Know Today Explained airs on Vermont Public Monday through Thursday at 2:30 p.m. Great local news stations. Coming up, Vermont did have some disaster plans in place, as we just heard, but those plans were of this day and age. Why we might need to plan as if the future is now. Explained comes from Washington Wise. It's an original podcast from Charles Schwab. Decisions made in Washington, D.C. can affect the markets every day, but what policy changes should investors be watching? Washington Wise is an original podcast for investors from Charles Schwab. The show covers the stories making news in Washington and also how they might affect your finances and investments. You can listen today at schwab.com/WashingtonWise. That's schwab.com/WashingtonWise.
Support for the show today comes from Rocket Money, and that is not where you put a bunch of your money on a rocket and watch it fly away. They actually are kind of the opposite of that. Between apps and streaming services and digital publications, the price of your subscriptions can add up really fast, and it's really easy to lose track of where your money is going. You might be spending way more than you realize. According to a 2022 survey, apparently, the average monthly cost of subscriptions was way over $100 more than what consumers thought they were paying. Enter Rocket Money, a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps you lower your bills all in one place. They want to help you stop throwing your money away. You can cancel unwanted subscriptions and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/explain. One more time, that's rocketmoney.com/explain.
It's Today Explained. I'm Noel King. Disaster maven Juliet Kayyem needs no introduction, but I will let her introduce herself anyway.
I'm the faculty chair of the Homeland Security program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, where I'm a professor and teach in crisis and disaster management. 20 years in the field, serving both in state government as a state Homeland Security advisor, and then my most recent federal job was as assistant secretary at DHS during the Obama administration, and I think and write and worry about disasters.
She also wrote the book The Devil Never Sleeps, Learning to Live in an Age of Disasters, and she says we are in fact in them.
This is where we should stop acting surprised, right? I mean, just extreme climate events are happening in frequency and magnitude that we've never seen before. In 2023 already, we have 12 confirmed weather climate disaster events with losses exceeding $1 billion in the United States.
The scene across Northern California, trees down, damaging homes, businesses, and cars.
This is actually just outside of Abilene. It's near Sweetwater, Texas. There's a storm chaser out there that did manage to get video of a baseball to golf ball sized hail. You can see it there. It's bouncing. Wow.
The brutal cold came in with a fury. At a city park, hats and gloves were left for anyone who needed them.
Since 1980 to last year, we have about 8.1 events a year. Those are getting faster and more frequent. In 1980, I think we had $3 billion events, and these are all adjusted numbers. So if I just look at the economic impact of what's happening, forget the cause, and we're not even talking about human life. We are facing these in a frequency, and they are setting what I call the floor, right? In other words, because these communities, whether they get hit next year or the following or 5 years from now, they are weaker because of the devastation. So it's the cumulative aspects of these disasters that is impacting the United States, and we've got to get out of this mindset that, okay, we're going to save lives, clean up after the disaster, and then cross our fingers.
I have to imagine that our response to disasters has changed over time, but tell me first, how has it traditionally worked?
The framework was essentially established, or it was professionalized in the 1970s under a framework called the Incident Command System. You'll hear people in my field talk about ICS. It's a very formalized system, and the benefit of it is it's hierarchical. You have an incident commander who's just deploying resources and getting logistics moving and planning, and the benefit of it is it's plug and play, so you can expand it. So if I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I need more bodies, people from Boston can come over. So the general theory or the general plan for emergency management is we say that locals respond, states coordinate, and the feds support. So it basically means disaster management makes or breaks at the local level. That is still true, right? It is what is your emergency management agency doing? What kind of plans do they have in place, and are they able to deploy resources? That had worked relatively well. You could expand things, but now we have no give. The reason why is because we don't have localized disasters like we used to. I mean, look at the fires in Canada. At some stage, the United States cannot